You got a smart mouth, don't you? The biker snarled, grabbing the bartender's shirt and tearing it with a violent yank. The fabric ripped away, revealing her back to the entire bar. Everyone expected fear, vulnerability, maybe tears. Instead, they saw something that silenced the room. There, etched in bold ink between her shoulder blades, was a U.S. Army Special Forces insignia, surrounded by military honors that told a story no one had imagined. The biker's hand dropped like he'd been burned, his swagger evaporating. The quiet woman he tried to intimidate wasn't just a bartender. She was a decorated war veteran who'd forgotten more about combat than he'd ever learned about intimidation. "My name is Harper Collins," she said quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd faced real monsters in places most people couldn't pronounce. 8th Special Forces Group, 3 tours in Afghanistan, and you just made the biggest mistake of your life. What happened next would destroy a criminal empire, transform a broken community, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Harper Collins had perfected her role at Mason's Roadhouse. Every glass polished to perfection, every bottle aligned just so, every patron served with quiet efficiency. She'd become invisible in the best possible way, which was exactly how she wanted it. But here's what I've learned about life. The moment you think you've got everything under control, that's precisely when the universe decides to test you. It was a Thursday night, nothing special, until the rumble of Harley engines cut through the evening air like thunder before a storm. Harper's hand froze mid-wipe on the glass she was cleaning, her body tensing in a way that spoke of training most folks couldn't imagine. The Steel Serpents were early this week, and that never meant anything good. Colt Harrove pushed through those swinging doors like he owned the place, which, let's be honest, he pretty much did. His leather vest bore patches that told stories of violence, his presence alone enough to make conversations die and eyes drop to the floor. Harper kept wiping that same glass, but her peripheral vision caught every movement, every gesture, every potential threat. Well, what do we have here?" Colt's voice carried the arrogance of someone who'd never been challenged. He sauntered up to the bar where Harper stood, his boots echoing against the worn wooden floor with each deliberate step. "You're new around here, ain't you, sweetheart?" The way he said sweetheart made Harper's skin crawl, but she'd learned long ago that showing fear was like blood in the water to predators. "I've been here a while," she replied evenly, still focused on that glass, now probably the cleanest piece of glassware in the entire county. Colt leaned against the bar, invading her space with the confidence of someone who'd never met real resistance. "Funny thing is, nobody told me we had ourselves a new little bartender." His gang members chuckled behind him, that nervous laughter that follows a bully's joke. Harper finally looked up, meeting his gaze with steady eyes that held secrets he couldn't fathom. "Maybe you weren't paying attention," she said quietly. Something in her tone stopped the laughter. That's when things got interesting. And by interesting, I mean the kind of moment that changes everything forever. Colt's face darkened like storm clouds gathering before a tornado, and Harper could feel the shift in the room's energy. "You got a smart mouth on you, don't you?" he growled, reaching across the bar to grab her wrist. But Harper Collins wasn't just any bartender, and what happened next would prove that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. As she pulled back, Colt's grip caught her shirt, and the fabric tore with a sound that echoed louder than it should have. Time slowed in that peculiar way it does during life-altering moments, those seconds when everything hangs in the balance. The torn fabric fell away, revealing Harper's back. There it was, a tattoo that made every person in the bar catch their breath simultaneously. The U.S. Army Special Forces insignia sat boldly between her shoulder blades, surrounded by markings that spoke of service, sacrifice, and skills most only see in movies. Colt's hand dropped like he'd grabbed a live wire, his bravado evaporating faster than morning dew in summer heat. The silence that followed spoke volumes, because everyone in Mason's Roadhouse realized they'd been underestimating the quiet bartender who'd been serving their drinks and keeping to herself. Now, let me tell you something about warriors most people don't understand. The real ones, who've seen hell and walked back out, don't need to announce themselves. Harper Collins had rolled into Mason's Roadhouse on a beat-up motorcycle, carrying nothing but a duffel bag, and secrets heavier than any weapon she'd ever carried. Afghanistan had taken pieces of her she'd never get back, left scars deeper than skin, and given her skills she prayed she'd never have to use again. But here's the thing about trying to outrun your past. It's got a funny way of catching up when you least expect it. She had chosen this forgotten corner of nowhere because nobody asked questions. Nobody cared about your story, and you could disappear into the background like smoke. The locals saw a quiet woman who mixed drinks with military precision and never caused trouble. What they didn't see were the nights she jolted awake in cold sweats, or how she positioned herself with her back to the wall, always watching the exits. The heat of summer had everyone in tank tops and shorts, but Harper kept those long sleeves pulled down tight, hiding the roadmap of her service etched in ink and scars across her arms. She'd perfected the art of being present, but invisible, helpful, but unreachable. You ever been in the service? Old Frank Delaney had asked her early on, his weathered hands polishing the same spot on the bar he'd worked for years. Harper paused a heartbeat too long before answering. Something like that. Frank, being the wise soul he was, never pressed for details. That's what she loved about Frank. He understood some stories weren't meant to be told. At least, not yet. The other regulars tried their luck with conversation at first, but Harper deflected questions with a skill that would make a politician jealous. "Where are you from?" became, "Oh, here and there." "What did you do before this?" turned into, "A little bit of everything." The truth was, Harper Collins had spent 8 years with an elite unit that didn't officially exist, in places not on any map, doing things that kept people like Frank sleeping peacefully. She'd been decorated for valor, recommended for promotion, offered desk jobs that would have set her up for life. Instead, she walked away, because sometimes the price of being a hero is higher than anyone should pay. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way her hands still reached for weapons that weren't there. These were invisible wounds no Purple Heart could heal. But if you want to understand Harper, know this. She wasn't hiding from cowardice. She was hiding from the part of herself that was too good at violence. Every day in that bar was a choice to be someone softer, someone who served beer instead of justice, who cleaned glasses instead of other things. The way she scanned every face that walked through the door wasn't paranoia. It was training that kept her alive in places where a moment's inattention meant never coming home. She watched how people moved, cataloging threats and escape routes without thinking, like humming a favorite song. Frank noticed, of course, how she always knew who was behind her, how she was never surprised, but he respected her need for space. Some folks need time to find themselves again, he'd tell the other bartenders when they commented on Harper's mysterious ways. What Frank didn't know was that Harper wasn't trying to find herself. She was trying to forget the person she used to be, the soldier so good at her job it scared even her. But some things you can't outrun forever, and sometimes the skills you're trying to bury are exactly what the world needs you to remember. The Steel Serpents had figured this out long before they rolled into Mason's Roadhouse territory. They'd perfected the art of fear like a master craftsman perfects his trade. For years, they'd run their protection racket with the precision of a Swiss watch and the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Every Friday, you'd hear them coming, that deep, rumbling thunder of Harley engines that made windows rattle and hearts skip beats. Colt Harrove had built his empire on a simple principle: make people more afraid of what you might do than what you actually do, and you'll never have to work as hard. It's the same psychology that keeps people trapped in bad relationships or dead-end jobs, where the fear of change outweighs the pain of staying put. The Steel Serpents didn't just take money. They took people's sense of safety, their belief that good could triumph over evil, their faith that someone would stand up. Frank Delaney had watched his life savings disappear, one $20 bill at a time. But what hurt worse was watching his community shrink into itself, like flowers closing up when storm clouds gather. Young families stopped coming for Sunday dinners, laughter died down, and Mason's Roadhouse began to feel more like a tomb than the heart of the community it once was. "You know what your problem is, Frank?" Colt had said during one of his visits, leaning back like he owned the place, which he practically did. "You still think this is the old days, when a handshake meant something and people looked out for each other." Frank had been wiping down tables, his 70-year-old hands shaking slightly. Whether from age or anger, nobody could tell. "Those days ain't coming back, old man. This is the new world, where the strong take what they want, and the weak pay for the privilege of being left alone." The cruelest part wasn't the money they took. It was how they made everyone complicit in their own oppression. Mrs. Henderson from the diner next door stopped making eye contact with Frank after she started paying the Serpents for protection. Jimmy Rodriguez, who ran the auto shop, began crossing the street to avoid conversations about standing up to them. Isolation became a weapon when wielded correctly. Divide and conquer. Make everyone feel like they're the only ones suffering. Convince them resistance is futile. Harper watched this unfold from behind the bar, her trained eyes cataloging every interaction, every moment of intimidation, every small surrender that fed the beast. She knew the patterns, having seen them in war zones, how fear spreads like infection, how good people convince themselves survival requires moral compromise, how communities crumble from the inside when nobody believes change is possible. But here's what Colt and his Steel Serpents didn't understand about fear. It's a finite resource, and the more you use it, the less effective it becomes. Harper had learned this in places most couldn't pronounce, watching oppressive regimes plant the seeds of their own destruction. Every Friday, when those engines roared outside Mason's Roadhouse, she felt something stir inside her that she'd tried to bury, a sense of justice that drove her to volunteer for the most dangerous missions, a belief that some lines should never be crossed, a knowledge that sometimes good people have to do hard things. The moment she'd been dreading and secretly hoping for was coming, though she didn't know it yet. Bullies like Colt assume silence equals consent, that compliance means acceptance, that today's victim will always be tomorrow's victim. They never consider that somewhere in their territory might be someone who's seen real monsters, faced actual evil, and learned that the only way to defeat darkness is to stop feeding it with fear. As Harper polished glasses and served drinks, she was unconsciously preparing for war, not because she wanted it, but because she recognized the signs that it was inevitable. The Steel Serpents had ruled through intimidation so long they'd forgotten the most important rule of warfare: never mistake patience for weakness. Because when the patient ones finally move, they end things quickly and permanently. There's a moment in every story where everything changes, where the underdog finds their voice, where the meek inherit the earth, where David picks up that stone and realizes he's not so small after all. For Mason's Roadhouse, that moment came on a Friday evening that started like any other, but ended with everyone understanding that some people are only quiet until they decide not to be. Frank Delaney had been cleaning the old jukebox when Colt stormed in with the fury of someone having a bad week and needing someone to blame. "My money better be ready, old man, because I'm not in the mood for your usual sob story about tough times," Colt snarled. Shoving Frank so hard, the 70-year-old stumbled backward into the wall. The sound of Frank's body hitting that wall was like a starter's pistol for Harper. She'd watched a lot happen in this bar, turned the other cheek more times than she could count. But watching someone hurt Frank crossed a line she didn't even know she'd drawn. "Hey!" Harper's voice cut through the bar's noise with military authority. For the first time in months, she wasn't trying to blend into the background. Colt turned toward her with a predatory smile that had intimidated so many others. But Harper Collins wasn't so many others. "You need to step away from him now." "Oh, look at this!" Colt laughed, a sound with no humor whatsoever. "The little bartender thinks she's got something to say about how I run my business." He took a step toward Harper, then another, each footfall deliberate and threatening. "Let me tell you something, sweetheart. You pour drinks, I collect money, and everybody stays in their lane. That's how this works." But Harper didn't back down, didn't look away, didn't do any of the things that had worked for Colt before. Instead, she moved around the bar with a fluidity that made it clear this wasn't her first confrontation with danger. "I said, step away from him," she repeated, her voice steady in a way that made the hair on Colt's neck stand up, though he couldn't explain why. "You're starting to irritate me. You know that?" Colt reached out to grab Harper's arm, probably planning to teach her the same lesson he'd taught so many others about respecting authority. That's when everything went sideways for him. Harper moved with the speed and precision that comes from years of training, stepping aside and using his momentum against him. But as she twisted away, his grip caught her shirt, and in his frustration and rage, he yanked hard enough to tear the fabric. The sound of ripping cloth echoed in the sudden silence, and then everyone in Mason's Roadhouse saw what Harper Collins had been hiding under those long sleeves and conservative clothes. The U.S. Army Special Forces insignia wasn't just a tattoo. It was a declaration, a history lesson, a warning sign, all rolled into one piece of art that suddenly made everything make sense. The way Harper moved, the way she scanned rooms, the way she'd handled drunk customers with just the right amount of force. It all clicked into place like puzzle pieces finding their homes. "Holy hell," someone whispered from the back of the bar, the reverence in that voice speaking for everyone present. Colt's hand dropped like he'd grabbed a live wire, his swagger evaporating as he realized he'd just threatened a decorated war veteran who'd probably forgotten more about combat than he'd ever learned about intimidation. The other patrons began to murmur, and Harper could feel the shift in the room's energy. She was no longer the quiet bartender they'd taken for granted. She was something far more dangerous and infinitely more valuable. "You're Special Forces," Frank said, his voice filled with awe and understanding that only comes from recognizing real heroism. Harper nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Colt's face as she watched him process this new information. "8th Special Forces Group, 3 tours in Afghanistan," she said quietly, each word hitting the room like a revelation. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of a community realizing their protector had been hiding in plain sight, serving drinks and waiting tables while carrying skills that could change everything. You know what they say about cornered animals? They're at their most dangerous when they've got nothing left to lose. Colt Harrove had built his identity around being the toughest guy in the room, and suddenly finding himself face to face with a decorated Special Forces veteran was like having his world turned upside down. But bullies don't back down gracefully. They double down, get desperate, and make mistakes that end everything. "I don't care what kind of soldier you think you are," Colt snarled, his voice shaking with rage and perhaps fear. This is my territory, and you're about to learn what happens to people who don't show proper respect. That's when he made the fatal error that would seal his fate. He reached into his boot and pulled a knife, the blade gleaming under the bar's dim lights like a promise of violence. The moment that steel appeared, Harper's demeanor shifted in a way that made everyone in the room take an involuntary step backward. This wasn't the quiet bartender anymore. This was a warrior trained to neutralize threats with extreme prejudice. "Put the knife down, Colt," Harper said, her voice carrying the tone of someone who'd given similar warnings in far more dangerous places. "You have no idea what you're starting here." But Colt was past rational thinking, driven by pride and the need to maintain his reputation in front of his crew. What happened next was like watching a masterclass in controlled violence, the kind military instructors use to show recruits what real combat looks like. Colt lunged with the knife, probably expecting Harper to panic or scream, like every other victim he'd terrorized. Instead, Harper moved with the fluid precision of someone who disarmed enemies in conditions that would give most people nightmares. Her left hand deflected the knife thrust, while her right delivered a strike to Colt's wrist that made him drop the weapon with a cry of pain. Before he could process what had happened, Harper had spun him around and driven him face first into the bar with enough force to rattle every bottle on the shelf. "That's for Frank," she said quietly, applying pressure to a nerve cluster in Colt's neck that made him gasp and go limp. The confrontation lasted maybe 10 seconds, but in those 10 seconds, the balance of power in Mason's Roadhouse and the entire community shifted permanently. The other steel serpents stood frozen, unsure whether to help their leader or run for their lives, probably never having seen anyone handle Colt like he was a troublesome child rather than a dangerous criminal. Harper kept Colt pinned with one hand while looking around the room, her eyes meeting those of every person present. "Anyone else have a problem with how I'm running this bar?" she asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because sometimes when people witness real courage, it awakens something in them they didn't know was sleeping. Jace Whitaker, Colt's right-hand man and enforcer, was the first to break ranks in a way nobody saw coming. "I'm done," he said, pulling off his steel serpent's vest and letting it fall to the floor like a shed skin. "I'm done pretending this is about respect or territory or any of that garbage. This is just bullying, and I'm tired of being part of it." One by one, others in the bar began to speak up. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store talked about the protection money bleeding her business dry. Young Tommy Rodriguez described how the serpents kept him from walking to school safely. Even some of Colt's own crew shared stories of things they'd been forced to do that kept them awake at night. It was like watching a dam burst, all these suppressed voices finding the courage to speak truth to power. When the police arrived, called by someone brave enough to dial 911 once they realized the serpents could be stopped, they found Colt zip-tied with the bar's cocktail napkin bands and a room full of witnesses ready to testify. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies damning, and for the first time in years, people were more afraid of staying silent than speaking up. Harper watched from behind the bar as they led Colt away in handcuffs, knowing this moment would ripple outward in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Within weeks, Mason's Roadhouse began to change in ways nobody could have predicted, least of all Harper. What started as a simple act of standing up to a bully sparked something larger, touching the very soul of what community could mean. Veterans from 3 counties over began showing up, drawn by word-of-mouth stories about the Special Forces bartender who'd taken down the steel serpents with her bare hands. At first, Harper was uncomfortable with the attention. She'd spent so long trying to be invisible that being seen felt like standing naked in a spotlight. But Frank pulled her aside one evening and said something that changed her perspective forever. Sometimes we don't get to choose our calling, Harper. Sometimes it chooses us, and our only real choice is whether we answer or spend our lives running from it. These weren't glory seekers or wannabe heroes showing up. These were broken souls, carrying invisible wounds, men and women who'd served their country and found themselves adrift in a civilian world that didn't understand their sacrifice. They came seeking something they couldn't name: connection, understanding, maybe just proof that someone else had walked through hell and made it out. "I haven't talked about Afghanistan in years," said Marcus Rodriguez, a Marine veteran who'd driven hours to meet Harper after hearing what happened. "My family thinks I'm fine. My friends act like nothing happened. My therapist keeps wanting to talk about my childhood when all I can think about are the friends who didn't make it home." Harper listened with the attention that comes from shared experience, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that showed she understood the weight he carried. "You know what's funny?" Marcus continued, his hands wrapped around a warm beer. "I thought I was broken, like permanently damaged goods, until I heard about what you did here. It made me remember, we're not just veterans, we're protectors. And maybe that's something the world still needs, even if it doesn't always appreciate it." That conversation became the seed of something unprecedented. Regular support groups meeting in the back room of Mason's Roadhouse, informal counseling sessions over pool games, a network of mutual support spreading organically through the veteran community. Harper became not just a bartender, but a facilitator, a bridge between the military world she'd left and the civilian life she was building. Other veterans began volunteering their skills. Jimmy Patterson, an Army engineer, offered free home repairs for elderly community members. Sarah Chen, a former Navy medic, taught first aid classes. Dave Mitchell, who'd lost his leg in Iraq, coached wheelchair basketball for disabled kids. The transformation was so profound, it caught attention far beyond their small community. A local newspaper reporter, Jennifer Walsh, wrote a story about the bar that became a beacon, and suddenly Harper was fielding calls from unexpected places. The Department of Veterans Affairs wanted to study their model. Civilian support groups asked for guidance on serving military families. Other small towns dealing with their own versions of the Steel Serpents sought advice on community organizing. "What you've created here isn't just a support group," Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a VA psychologist, explained during a visit to study their approach. "You've built something that addresses the fundamental challenge facing veterans, the transition from being part of something meaningful to feeling lost and purposeless in civilian life. You've given them a new mission." Harper's story went viral on social media, not as military propaganda, but as a real example of what happens when someone with the right skills uses them for something larger than themselves. Television producers called for documentaries, book publishers offered contracts, speaking bureaus wanted her for conferences. But the most meaningful recognition came from a handwritten letter by Senator Patricia Williams, a veteran herself, asking Harper to testify before Congress about innovative approaches to veteran support and community resilience. The quiet bartender who'd wanted to hide from the world became a national symbol of service extending beyond the battlefield. Just when Harper thought she'd found peace, when Mason's Roadhouse had become the sanctuary she'd never dared dream of, the shadows of the past crept back with a vengeance. It started with small things. Veterans mentioning strange encounters in neighboring towns, reports of new motorcycle clubs, asking about the soldier who took down Colt Harrove, whispers of someone recruiting ex-serpents who'd scattered after his arrest. Harper's old instincts, the ones she'd tried to suppress, began tingling like phantom limbs sensing approaching storms. When you cut off a snake's head, sometimes the body doesn't die. It grows a new one, often smarter, more cautious, and infinitely more dangerous. Word was that someone calling himself Viper had been consolidating the Steel Serpent's remnants, bringing together Colt's empire under new leadership. Not some hot-headed biker, but someone who'd studied Colt's mistakes, who understood Harper represented a threat to their way of life, who was patient enough to plan properly. The first real sign of trouble came when Jace Whitaker didn't show up for his regular Thursday night support group. "He's scared," Frank observed, noticing Harper's worried glances toward the door as the evening wore on without Jace's presence. "That boy's been coming every week since he quit the Serpents, regular as clockwork, and now he's gone." Harper tried calling Jace, but it went straight to voicemail. Not unusual, except Jace always returned calls within an hour, a habit from rebuilding his life post-gang. The next morning brought more unsettling news. Mrs. Patterson saw unfamiliar motorcycles outside Jace's apartment, and Tommy Rodriguez swore he'd spotted Colt's old lieutenant, Snake Morrison, in the diner across town, despite supposedly being in prison. "I don't like this," Harper confided to Dr. Morrison during a visit. "It feels like the calm before a storm, like something's building just out of sight." Dr. Morrison nodded, having learned to trust Harper's tactical instincts. "Your hypervigilance served you well in combat zones. Maybe instead of suppressing those instincts, you should listen to them." That evening, Harper did something she hadn't done since Afghanistan. A formal threat assessment, mapping escape routes, identifying defensive positions, cataloging resources. The healer was remembering how to be a warrior, because sometimes the only way to protect what you've built is to fight for it. The attack started not on her directly, but on the support network she'd built. Veterans reported harassment at jobs, mysterious car troubles, sudden tax audits, building inspections designed to disrupt rather than serve any legitimate purpose. It was psychological warfare, meant to isolate Harper by making association with her costly. "Whoever's behind this understands military tactics," Harper explained to Sheriff Patricia Valdez during an emergency meeting at the Roadhouse. "They're not coming head-on because they know that's where we're strongest. They're cutting our supply lines, breaking morale, making us turn on each other." The sheriff, a 20-year veteran of military and law enforcement, recognized the pattern. "It's counterinsurgency in reverse," she said grimly. "Instead of winning hearts and minds, they're making people afraid to be associated with you." The pressure was working. Some veterans stopped attending support groups. Local businesses declined to sponsor events. And even Frank received anonymous calls suggesting he reconsider his employment choices. Harper watched the community she'd built fracture and felt the familiar rage that once drove her to volunteer for dangerous missions. This time, it was personal. They were threatening the only family she'd chosen for herself. In the information age, the past refuses to stay buried, especially when someone with motivation and resources starts digging. Harper always knew this day might come, had spent sleepless nights wondering when someone would connect the quiet bartender to classified operations that never happened. The leak came from a disgruntled Pentagon clerk with access to archived files and a grudge against military leadership, who had no idea that dumping classified documents online would destroy Harper's carefully constructed life. The headline on investigative journalist Marcus Chen's blog read like a thriller. "Operation Nightfall, the Afghanistan mission that left 23 civilians dead and one Special Forces soldier decorated for heroism." Harper saw it on her phone during the morning rush at Mason's Roadhouse, her hands trembling as she read details about a night she'd tried to forget. The comment section filled with armchair warriors debating the moral complexities of split-second decisions made in the fog of war. Within hours, major news networks picked up the story, and Harper, who'd fought to remain invisible, was at the center of a national controversy. The leaked documents were accurate, but incomplete, reducing human complexity to sterile facts. Operation Nightfall was a joint mission to capture or kill a high-value target, coordinating attacks from a compound in Kunar province. Harper's unit had intelligence that the target was meeting with tribal leaders in what appeared to be a civilian gathering, a deliberate human shield tactic. We had positive identification, imminent threat, and authorization to engage, Harper had told investigators, her voice steady despite the weight. But intelligence is only as good as its sources, and sometimes those sources have agendas. The documents didn't capture Harper's split-second decision to abort the original plan and attempt a surgical strike that saved dozens while eliminating the target. They mentioned her medal for valor, but couldn't convey the nights she lay awake wondering if there was another way, a path that wouldn't have left families grieving. Now, that struggle was being played out in public opinion, with people who'd never faced such choices passing judgment. Cable news turned her into a symbol, hero on one channel, war criminal on another. Veterans groups rallied with hashtags like #IStandWithHarper, while peace activists protested outside the roadhouse, calling for prosecution. The most painful part wasn't strangers' criticism, but the doubt in the eyes of those she cared about. Some veterans stopped attending meetings, local politicians became unavailable, and regular customers treated her with fascination and fear, like an exotic, dangerous creature. Harper faced a new war, fought with documents and sound bites, no less capable of destroying what she'd built. The question wasn't whether she could survive, but whether her community would. Betrayal cuts deeper than any physical wound, attacking your belief in people's goodness. Harper knew expanding the veteran program brought risks, but she never imagined danger from within. It started with small inconsistencies, support group details reaching the wrong people, veterans' struggles mentioned by strangers, security procedures. Harper shared only with her inner circle appearing in Sheriff Valdez's intelligence reports about serpent activities. At first, she thought it was paranoia from media attention and threats. But then she overheard Dr. Elizabeth Morrison on the phone discussing Rodriguez's PTSD episodes. "Just remember our agreement. When this is over, I want that research grant, and I want HarperCollins discredited." The betrayal hit like a physical blow, not just because Morrison was feeding information to enemies, but because Harper had trusted her, shared her struggles, believed they shared goals. Confronting Morrison took all her discipline to avoid violence. "How long have you been selling us out?" Harper asked quietly, cornering the psychologist in the empty bar. Morrison's face cycled through surprise, fear, and defiance. "You have no idea what it's like to watch someone with no training, no degrees, accomplish more in months than I have in years," she replied bitterly. "You waltz in with your heroic story and charisma, and everyone thinks you're a miracle worker. Do you know how that makes people like me feel?" Morrison justified her actions, claiming she was approached by a concerned veterans organization to evaluate unconventional methods, convincing herself exposing Harper would benefit veterans by restoring faith in professional care. The money and career promises made betrayal easy. "You sold out people who trusted you with their deepest traumas," Harper said, her voice cold with fury. "Veterans who found the courage to ask for help, and you turned their pain into currency." Morrison's betrayal sent shockwaves, raising questions beyond one person's treachery. If someone trusted could be compromised, who else might be? Harper conducted internal security reviews, feeling like counterintelligence operations she'd left behind. Veterans became suspects. Staff faced background checks. Even Frank endured questioning. This is what they wanted, Harper realized, reviewing files late at night. They couldn't beat us directly, so they're destroying us from within by making us paranoid. Attendance at support groups dropped by 60%. Veterans worried about data security. Some suggested shutting down the program. Harper faced a dilemma. how to maintain trust and openness while protecting against infiltration. The answer might require becoming what she'd hoped to avoid, a predator, hunting threats with the lethal efficiency she'd used in service. The night everything culminated was a Texas storm of biblical proportions. Thunder rattling windows, lightning strobing the sky, rain like bullets on the roof. Harper had organized a Veterans Appreciation Night to show they wouldn't be intimidated, with 50 veterans, families, and supporters gathered. She'd turned the roadhouse into a fortress. Security cameras, reinforced doors, combat veterans at strategic points. "You're expecting trouble," Frank observed, watching Harper check locks. "I'm always expecting trouble," she replied, scanning the rain-streaked parking lot. "That's what keeps everyone safe." Her words proved prophetic as the celebration turned into a scene from a war movie. The attack came as the storm peaked, a coordinated assault showing months of planning. The power grid failed, plunging the roadhouse into darkness as emergency lighting kicked in. Through the rain, Harper spotted 30 or 40 motorcycles surrounding the building, not the dozen Colt used to bring. "This is not a coincidence," Harper announced, her voice cutting through nervous chatter. "Everyone away from the windows, families with children to the back room, veterans with combat experience up front with me." Civilians moved with discipline, understanding survival depended on following orders. Harper slipped into command mode, assessing the situation with cold analysis from Afghanistan. They had defensive advantages, but were outnumbered and trapped. The attackers chose their moment perfectly. Emergency services delayed by the storm, visibility near zero, violence masked by thunder. "Harper Collins!" a voice boomed through a bullhorn over the storm. "My name is Vincent Viper Morrison, and we need to talk about this community's future. You've got 60 seconds to come outside alone, or we start putting bullets through these windows." Harper recognized the voice from intercepted calls Sheriff Valdez shared, the leader consolidating serpent remnants. She felt the calm of combat situations, looking at faces she'd come to care about. Veterans fighting their battles, families who'd embraced her community, people who trusted her. "Like hell," muttered Danny Rodriguez, a Marine veteran who'd lost fingers to an IED, but shot better than most. "We don't negotiate with terrorists, especially domestic ones." Other voices agreed. These weren't helpless civilians, but a community forged in shared struggle. Harper realized the choice wasn't surrender or fight, but whether to trust the bonds they'd built. As she reached for the radio to coordinate defense, lightning illuminated faces showing hope. A family worth fighting for, standing together rather than driven apart by fear. Surviving isn't the same as living, and making it through the storm is just the beginning of thriving. The siege lasted 4 hours, ending not with a shootout, but with federal agents arresting Vincent Morrison, who'd been tracked for months. Harper's tactical defense and the community's solidarity bought time for justice to catch up, dismantling the Serpent's network. But the real victory wasn't Morrison's arrest. It was what Harper discovered about herself. She'd expected to revert to her soldier self, finding satisfaction in outmaneuvering enemies. Instead, she found her greatest strength wasn't fighting, but inspiring others to fight for something worth protecting. That night taught Harper her true mission wasn't combat, but creating spaces for broken people to heal and discover their strength. Now, Harper serves as National Coordinator for the Veterans Community Integration Program, helping establish support networks modeled on Mason's Roadhouse in small towns across America. It requires a different courage, being vulnerable, sharing struggles, trusting that showing weakness can be the strongest act. The hardest transition for any veteran isn't living without combat's adrenaline, Harper tells congressional subcommittees, corporate boards, and community leaders. It's finding purpose in civilian life that matches the intensity of military service. Her program, replicated in over 200 communities, reaches veterans, where traditional VA services fall short. The irony isn't lost on Harper that her greatest achievement came from putting down weapons, not picking them up. Frank once told her, "Sometimes, the most powerful thing a warrior can do is teach others they don't have to fight alone." Every Thursday, Harper still works behind the bar at Mason's Roadhouse, now decorated with photos of local heroes and serving as an unofficial headquarters for veteran support. It's a pilgrimage site, not for the woman who took down a biker gang, but for someone who proved service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. The moment that captures who Harper has become happened when Brooklyn Hayes, a 23-year-old Army veteran fresh from Syria, walked into the Roadhouse with determination and desperation. "I heard someone here might understand what it's like to feel you don't belong anywhere," Brooklyn said, her hands shaking. Harper saw herself from years earlier, trying to outrun ghosts, convinced the best she could do was hide. But she also saw potential, strength, the possibility of healing when pain is understood and service valued. "You know what I've learned?" Harper said, setting down coffee for a long conversation. "The war doesn't end when you come home. It just changes battlefields. But the good news is, you don't have to fight it alone." As Brooklyn's shoulders relaxed, Harper felt the satisfaction once tied to missions, now measured in lives rebuilt, communities strengthened, the understanding that the most important battles help others heal. Harper Collins's story at Mason's Roadhouse delivers a powerful lesson. True strength lies not in seeking glory, but in quietly protecting others, even when it means standing alone against overwhelming odds. Her hidden tattoo, revealed in a moment of violence, transformed a room of skeptics into a community awakened by her courage. This teaches us that the most impactful heroes often go unnoticed, carrying scars, both visible and invisible, while building something greater than themselves. Harper's choice to confront a bully, not for personal gain, but to defend a vulnerable friend, reminds us that real change begins with a single act of defiance against injustice. Her journey from a war-torn past to fostering a sanctuary for veterans shows that healing and purpose can emerge from pain, inspiring us to look beyond surface judgments and recognize the resilience in those around us. In our own lives, how often do we overlook the quiet warriors who hold communities together? Harper's story stirs the heart, urging us to stand up for what's right, to rebuild where there's brokenness, and to find strength in unity. It's a call to action. Embrace your inner courage, support those who've sacrificed, and never underestimate the power of a single moment to spark transformation. Have you ever witnessed someone's hidden strength change a situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. If Harper's journey moved you, hit that subscribe button for more tales of unsung heroes that ignite the soul. Like and share to spread this powerful message. And check out the next video for another story that will inspire and uplift.